The member for Morialta.
Thank you, sir. I'm pleased to have the opportunity to continue my address in reply to the opening of Parliament given by Her Excellency the Honourable Frances Adamson AC, and again thank her for her service to the people of South Australia. Sir, Morialta is so much more than an electorate. It is a community. It's a community that I am proud to have been elected as the local member 4 times. It is the community where I grew up. It is the community that I love and that I look forward to my children growing up in and being a part of for not potentially just decades to come, potentially generations to come. It is, others have made claim to their parts of the world being the best part of South Australia. I lay claim to Morialta being the best part of Australia, sir. The election just passed was certainly a disappointing outcome for the Liberal Party, and the messages that were conveyed by voters who, some for the first time and some who go back and forth, those voters who chose not to support me or the Liberal Party at the last election, I want to pledge to you that I will give my utmost during this term of Parliament and any others in which I'm lucky enough to be the local member for Morialta. I will be there to support you, as all of those voters who did support the Liberal Party and me in Morialta. I think that the last term of Parliament was an unusual one in many ways. Certainly the challenges posed by the pandemic were profound. And I think that after 2 years of pandemic, the situation felt by most first-term governments where they have done their work to address the ills and wrongs of their predecessors, and usually it is more often than not the case that the voters will give them an opportunity to continue that work. It certainly didn't feel like a one-term government for anyone who lived through the years of 2020 and 2021. They felt like a very long time indeed. The government was forced to take extraordinary measures. It didn't occur to me in my wildest dreams that I would have ever been part of a government that was having to enforce state borders and checkpoints, and the idea that freedoms and liberties would have been restricted in a way that is anathema to anybody who has liberal values as I do. And yet, the circumstances and the danger and the risk to the health and safety of our community were so profound that these extraordinary steps had to be taken. I was never enthusiastic about mandates for vaccinations, for example, so yet as Education Minister, I stood next to the Police Commissioner and endorsed their introduction when that had to happen. Again, it was the very strong health advice that it was utterly necessary for the health and safety of our community, and indeed that it saved lives. And I believe that it did. I am very, very pleased that we are now in a situation where those mandates have been able to be relaxed. And indeed, this week, for the first time since probably the 3rd term of last year, we no longer have the requirement that masks be worn in high schools, for example. All of these measures, sir, I understand, upset, disappointed, aggravated and infuriated in some cases many people who have traditionally supported the Liberal Party. And to those members I say, I understand that disappointment. As I said last year when we were doing it, and indeed on polling day when I had many discussions with people who were putting forward these points of view, I understand that frustration. Those measures were taken to save lives and they were necessary, and I stand by that. But I'm very pleased that we are now in a situation where Professor Speirs and the other health advisors have clearly provided that information, that the stage of the pandemic we're at, the rate of vaccination in our community, has meant that many of those measures can be relieved. It is really important, however, that as we move through any part of the pandemic, the discussion is respectful, because I fear that sometimes what has been lost, and I see some elements of it even now, as people are unfortunately taking measures outside vaccination hubs to discourage people from getting vaccinated, respect is tremendously important. We need to respect the freedom of people to express their point of view, and people need to respect that governments and public officers are doing their best to protect health and to protect lives. There were many messages that were given to me on election day. Some of them were in relation to votes on certain measures. Many were in relation to measures taken during the pandemic. And indeed, some people were disappointed by the way that government interacted, in particular in relation to hospitality restrictions during the pandemic. There is never one reason that an election is won or lost. There's always a multitude of reasons that inform every vote, and every constituent has this important God-given right that we protect fiercely to choose the basis on which they elect their governments. And I've certainly heard a lot of messages to all of those people in my community, whether they voted for me or not, whether they're enthusiastic or disappointed. I promise you I've read every piece of correspondence. I've had many, many conversations, and I'm grateful for the feedback that I've had as the member for Morialta. I'm even more grateful for the trust that has been given to me as your local MP now for the 4th time. When I first put my hand up to run for Morialta, it was 2008. It was an 8% Labor seat at that time, sir. Lindsay Simmons had come in the 2006 election, won it comfortably. A redistribution improved the margin to 6.7 when I was the Liberal candidate, and I was pleased to get a 12% or summit swing at that 2010 election. Since becoming the candidate for Morialta, there have been redistributions that have improved the margin and reduced it. I started with Newton and the south-eastern side of McGill and Aldana. I now have them back after them being with the members for Hartley and Bragg for 8 years. Redistributions come and go, but broadly we're a very similar seat now to that which Lindsay Simmons won with 8% for the Labor Party in 2006, and I am very encouraged by the fact that 10% people more now vote for the Liberal Party than did in 2006. It's a significant improvement, and I put it certainly to the wisdom of the people of Morialta. We had some very good results in 2014 and 2018, where the margin approached 10%. The margin is narrowed now. I certainly take on board the criticisms that I've heard, and I know that in the years ahead, the work that was done between 2018 and 2022, I think, will be appreciated, but I certainly will never take for granted those that were disappointed. It is important, though, especially given that it has been such an extraordinary time, to place on the record some of those things that were achieved in my community between 2018 and 2022. And I'd like to take this opportunity also to thank our former Premier Stephen Marshall for his extraordinary endeavours, not only through the pandemic, which has had much commentary during this address and reply debate, the extraordinary work that he did. I know he was working 7 days a week for every waking hour, and he wasn't sleeping too many. He put his heart and soul into protecting lives and to protecting jobs in South Australia, and he succeeded better than any other Premier in the nation. But through that term of government, he was also assiduous in ensuring that each and every one of our election commitments that were able to be met. Now, there were a couple of examples where that wasn't the case, and a couple of people have mentioned those during the course of the debate. But we had more than 400 commitments to the people of South Australia, and we delivered more than 400 commitments to the people of South Australia over the last term. In Morialta, that was very important, and when people in Morialta put their faith in me and the Liberal government in 2018, I sought to work hard and represent them, and I'm very pleased to be able to advise that our team delivered them. We delivered lower costs, we delivered more jobs, and we delivered better services, and we delivered important infrastructure projects for the people of Morialta. And they were across a range of areas. Road safety, in terms of schooling and educational opportunities, in terms of health and hospital services, and importantly in terms of local sport, environmental, recreational, community facilities. In the area of road safety, a very important project was the Paradise Interchange, an $18 million project that improved the parking arrangements at Paradise Interchange out of sight. There are members in this parliament who have heard me say for years and years that in previous generations, in previous iterations, I've been parking at Paradise Interchange, and you know, if you got there after 8 a.m, you had to park across the road in the field next to the Paradise Influencers Church. And then if it was raining, you'd get muddy feet, you'd be in danger as you're crossing 6 lanes of Darley Road, and indeed potentially late for a bus. There's challenges at the interchange, to be sure, but they have been alleviated so massively by the $18 million build that has put an extra nearly 400 parks in the immediate vicinity of the platforms. Some of those are still available usually whenever I've gotten there, sometimes as late as 8:30 and even as late as 9 o'clock on occasion. That is such a dramatic improvement to the life of the everyday traveller and commuter in the Morialta electorate. People living in Athelston, people living in Newton who use the interchange, people living in Paradise in the member for Hartley's electorate, people living in Highbury in my electorate, people living in Hope Valley in the member for Newlands electorate, people living in Dernancourt in the member Hartley's electorate, all coming together at Paradise Interchange. I know that they very much appreciate that improvement. We also had some significant safety upgrades at, indeed, intersections. There is traffic lights now, a pedestrian-activated crossing outside Thornton Park Primary School, something the school community there fought for years. We have traffic lights outside the Dernancourt Shopping Centre, something incredibly important for anybody who has ever tried to park in the Dernancourt Shopping Centre and then turn right onto Lower North East Road. I took the now Treasurer, then Transport Minister, with me on a visit to my electorate when he was first made the Minister in 2014. I remember we were sitting at that intersection trying to get out of the traffic lights, and I said, no, you've got to turn right here. You've got to turn right. And we were waiting for 5 minutes for the opportunity to do so. The former government put in place an improved entry to the centre, which was a modest improvement. The Marshall Liberal government delivered a much increased turning right lane and indeed those traffic lights, and the positive feedback I've had from Highbury residents and Vista residents in my electorate, and indeed from Dernancourt residents and Hope Valley residents and other members of the community who use it, has been overwhelmingly positive. And I'm very grateful to people like Joy Ritchie, former councillor, to the member for Morfett's father, John Patterson, Professor Patterson, who was a community member who was also involved in that campaign, along with me and some other members of the community. Thanks to all of them, it's been done now. Grave Street and Newton Road, traffic lights there were sought since before I was a Member of Parliament. It was something that the former member for Morialta, Lindsay Simmons, campaigned on in that 2006 to 2010 period, but the former government never delivered. They always said it was too hard, too expensive, but it was delivered, along with my colleague Vincent Tazier, and I thank Stefan Knoll and Corey Wingard, the former Transport Ministers, who delivered that upgrade. And most recently, the upgraded intersection at Silks Road and Gorge Road, which is a dramatic improvement to safety. Gorge Road has been resealed. There's a new pedestrian refuge on Lower North East Road at Highbury for people who are walking to the Highbury Primary School with their kids. That is sorely been sought and gratefully received. And of course, we have a major project criticised viciously by the Labor Party on many, many occasions, but much appreciated by anybody who has seen the dramatic improvements in commuter time, that upgrade of McGill Road and Portrush Road intersection. That is so much smoother now. The work is nearly complete on the beautification, but the improved lane infrastructure has had a massive difference to people living in my electorate and electorates across the east and northeastern suburbs, where the extraordinary delays that previous operation of that intersection caused had big flow-on effects right across those routes. So as the Minister for Education, I had the honour of presiding over one of the most significant sets of reforms. Indeed, it's hard to argue that there's been a more significant set of reforms ever since Mr Hartley was the Director of Schooling in the late 19th century in South Australia, with a $1.5 billion set of upgrades to our school infrastructure, massive expansion of our public education system, a series of 5 new schools, 5 new public schools, indeed the completion of Adelaide Botanic High School that was certainly a result, I think, of Rachel Sanderson's hard work, but commissioned under the former government and well underway when we got in. But then 5 new schools at Angle Vale, Aldinga, Whyalla and Goolwa, all already open. And indeed now the Morialta Secondary College, due to open for Year 7s next year, the transition of Year 7 into high school, and radical upgrades to more than 100 of our public schools across South Australia, the introduction of grants, infrastructure grants for non-government schools, which started in 2018 and which the new government has committed to keeping going forward. All of these, sir, were massive improvements in the infrastructure of our education system. At the same time, also delivering on signing the National School Funding Reform Agreement in 2018, which was first signed at the East Adelaide School, primary school, in the member for Dunstan's electorate, when Dan Tehan, the Federal Education Minister, as was then, came to South Australia, signed that agreement, which unlocked billions of dollars in increased recurrent funding from the federal government to South Australian schools, but critically, and the Labor Party never talked about this when they were in government before, it required a dramatic uplift in the state government's expenditure in school education, in public schools in South Australia. To get the federal government to sign that document we had to commit, and I had to convince Rob Lucas and the members of Cabinet that we needed to commit an extra $700 million of state taxpayer funds to our public education system over the decade to follow, over and above the settings left by our predecessors. And in addition to that, of course, we also had the increased expenditure. It was around $40 million a year of Year 7s being in high school and funded at the high school rate. The dramatic increase in investment in education was matched by a reforming agenda focused on things that were going to really shift the dial and make a difference in outcomes for children and young people. And I'm very proud of that. Now, in the Morialta electorate, which my comments have been mostly focused on today, that also had some pretty profound impacts. I already mentioned the new Morialta Secondary College, and I'm grateful to the new Minister for Education who kindly invited me to join him in turning the first sod on that development. I'm very grateful that the new government is continuing with that work. It would have been a very foolish decision not to. I suspect that it was probably legally far too long the way, and of course that work is there because there is an urgent need for more capacity in our public schooling system in high schools in the east and northeastern suburbs. But I don't want to be churlish about this. The new minister has absolutely done the right thing on this in continuing the work, and I look forward to seeing him. I hope he comes back to Rostrevor next year to welcome the Year 7s as they start, and then at the end of next year when all of the building works are complete, and indeed that will be a beautiful new school. I look forward to being a local member and along with the member for Hartley who's across the road and thanking the new minister for continuing that work. It's an $84 million project. It'll serve 1,200 students when full in about 6 years' time, and it will give them many opportunities. It will ensure that the dramatic capacity challenges at Nord International High School, as is now, at Modbury High School and Charles Campbell College and Marrickville High School, all of those schools are interconnected because, of course, when one school starts having to enforce a capacity management plan, the school next to it starts having to enforce its own or potentially have a capacity management plan, and it has these flow-on effects. It reduces choice and creates anxiety for families. So the introduction of this new school will provide a relaxation of that urgent capacity challenge in the east and northeastern suburbs. It will be a massive benefit for those communities. Of course, Nord International High School has also benefited from what was a $52 million commitment by the Marshall Liberal government. Under Labor, there was $30 million put on the table for an upgrade of what was then Nord Morialta High School. What the Labor Party didn't say before the 2018 election was that $15 million of that was predicated on the sale of the land at Rostrevor and flogging it off for housing. We reversed that decision and, as I said, built the new school. We also found that to move that middle campus onto the Norwood site on the parade at McGill, we had to put in not $15 million of new money, but indeed $50 million of new money. But my goodness, what an extraordinary improvement it is there. That school, which had 600 students, now has 1,900 students. A massive increase, effectively a 1,300 new student capacity at that school for that $50 million investment. And the facilities there are tremendous, world-class, and I think will be of benefit to those students for many years to come. But these projects will also ensure that where Nord Morialta High School had been rigorously enforcing its zone for some time, in the years ahead I look forward to students who are interested in those specialty programs that Nord International has to offer, being able to access them. Charles Campbell College, Modbury High School, indeed, these high schools benefited from significant upgrades in recent years. Modbury High School, the Liberal Party, had committed an extra $2 million to improve the toilets. Were we re-elected. I'm hopeful in Thursday's budget that we'll see the Labor Party follow through on that. I think in the last week we've seen how sorely that extra investment was needed. But the new middle school at Modbury High School is an absolute generational leap forward. Not just one generation, but anyone who remembers those old transportables looking out over the courtyard at Modbury High School would remember, and indeed there are multiple generations of families that have potentially been through those old transportables from the 1950s. The school celebrated when they were knocked down and celebrated even more when that world-class new Year 7 centre was completed. Stradbroke School, McGill Primary School currently have upgrades underway, and I look forward to their completion along with other schools in the broader area. Modbury Hospital was a very important body of work under the former Liberal government, and it has benefited from a $98 million investment. There's more work to be done, and I look forward to seeing that work being completed. It was tremendously important for our government, and the Health Minister during the Marshall Liberal government, Stephen Wade, would often talk about the need to have more opportunities for people to get their health care services closer to home, more convenient for them where they live, more convenient for their families, and that's certainly, I know that I've always appreciated the staff, the outstanding staff at Modbury Hospital, who have always looked after my family when we've been in need. In terms of community and environmental infrastructure, there's been significant benefits to my community through the work of the Marshall Liberal government. The dramatic upgrades to the playing fields, the synthetic pitch, and indeed lights at Campbelltown Soccer Club, the home of the Red Devils, and indeed the other upgrades, particularly to change rooms, so that more women players could be involved, whether it's in the women's team at the Athelston Raggies, using their Foxfield Oval upgraded facilities, the Hope Valley Sporting Club, where $265,000 was invested under the Marshall Liberal government to upgrade those change rooms, to a wide range of other sporting and community infrastructure projects in the Morialta electorate, environmental projects, the Friends of Black Hill and Morialta, Dry Creek, the Lobethal Bushland Park, which of course was an important grant after the bushfires, and I'll come to, before I conclude these comments, some words about those parts of Morialta that are no longer in my electorate. The $1 million commitment to further works at Hope Valley was an important measure if the Marshall Liberal government had been elected. I encourage the new Labor government to look at those reservoir openings. It was a wonderful day when Hope Valley Reservoir was open to the public. There is facilities there that are used, and people can access that reservoir in a way that they couldn't before. But we would like, ideally, to be able to have people to walk around the reservoir without having to go back out on the road, and I hope that the new government will deliver on that. Certainly it would have been a priority for us had we been re-elected. I think that it is as true now as it ever has been, sir, that the state of South Australia is the best place to live in the world. It's the best place to work, to play, to raise a family. And as the new government comes to office with the endorsement of the South Australian people, we wish them well. We genuinely wish them well. This is our state. This is our community. We want the new government to succeed in making our state stronger. We took to the election a set of value propositions that we believed were in the state's best interests, and some of them were disagreed with by the now government. They characterised them in a different way. I don't think always in a fair way, but nevertheless, they convinced enough people to vote for them to have the reins of power. We will hold them to account in delivering on those things that the new government promised the people of South Australia. I don't think there is any question when it comes to health services. The new government has set the bar high on what they have promised they will deliver, fixing ramping, delivering on health outcomes for South Australia's people. In early childhood, sir, the new government promised to deliver universal childcare for all South Australian 3-year-olds, in addition to, universal preschool for all South Australian 3-year-olds, in addition to all South Australian 4-year-olds. They made some bold claims about what they would deliver in the early childhood space, and as Shadow Education Minister, I'll be holding them to account there too. But we want them to succeed in making our state strong, in keeping our state safe, and indeed in ensuring that all South Australians have access for generations to come, our children particularly, for generations to come, to this continuing to be the best place to live, work and play in the world, best place to raise a family. Sometimes in this state we're confronted, as the rest of the world does, by economic challenges and headwinds. Sometimes we face pandemic, and some parts of our community face natural disaster and challenges. And sir, you and I spent a great deal of time together in the summer of 2019-20 and in the subsequent months after our communities, what areas that is largely now in Carville, some of which is in Schubert and Hyson, but at the time was half in Morialta and half in Carville until the redistribution removed from Morialta all of our hills areas. This is a community that has suffered extraordinary property damage, livestock damage, lifestyle damage, and loss of life and injury. That the loss of life was not greater should not diminish in anyone's mind the extraordinary trauma of the Cuddly Creek fires upon that community. It also, in my mind, I'll never forget the extraordinary resilience, strength in face of desperately difficult times demonstrated by those communities in the wake of those bushfires. This is a community that doesn't ask much of government. It's a community that supports its neighbour. But when entire swathes of the community were burnt, damaged, trauma suffered, people in hospital, people dying, this is a community that still found strength to rally around, but it's a community that the Marshall Liberal government was there to support. I stood with Stephen Marshall, with our former Governor, Hugh Van Lay, with former Prime Minister Scott Morrison, as they were warmly received in the Lobethal Recovery Centre, the Lobethal Sporting Ground for Christmas Eve. There were enormous numbers of engagements there between us as local members, sir, the federal member Rebecca Sharkey, and indeed those other community leaders. I think the Leader of the Opposition, as he was then, now the Premier, came out on one occasion or two occasions as well. And they were received warmly by the community, but the community needed our help, and I'm pleased that there were new measures put in place to support those communities by our government that had never been put in place after previous disasters. Certainly there were measures that, as local members, you and I sought from our government, and I think we worked very well with Alex Zimmerman, who is, of course, the recovery coordinator, to ensure that those measures were delivered. I'm very sad that these areas are no longer in the Morialta electorate, but they will always be in my and my family's lives, and certainly when I have my days with the children on the weekends, and our family still enjoys sharing time in those communities when we can, and will for the years to come. To the people of Morialta who I served for that term and previous terms, and to those who have now given me the greatest honour of my life to continue, indeed in my professional life, to continue to serve as their local member in the years to come, I dedicate my support, and I will faithfully serve you in the years to come.
Thank you, Member for Morialta, and I acknowledge too your extraordinary support to me following the Cuddly Creek bushfire, for which I was very grateful.